What's good, everybody? Welcome back to Average Bros Media. For the Legacy GT fans out there today, this video is for you, so get hyped. So I mentioned it in a previous video, but I'm going to be replacing all the fuel lines in the engine bay of the car and do a full AN style system up front. I'll show you guys kind of what's over there. I've just never really liked it since I put it in, but I didn't want to immediately replace it when I did it, so I've left it for a while. We'll get to that in a second, but I've been mentioning this full send wagon build for a long time now, and things are finally in motion. I've got a few parts that have arrived. I've got wheels on order that will be here in a couple weeks, and we're looking at powder coating the Brembos that are on the car. So one, I want to show you one of the parts that's already come in, give you a little teaser, and then two, I want to get you guys' opinion on what color I should paint the Brembos. We got some special parts from White Line Performance. We've got rear control arms that's going to give us adjustment on that rear setup to have a little bit more camber that we're going to need to fit the meaty setup that we're going with. And I won't say too much more than that, but it is substantially larger than what's on the car currently. So the next order of business is deciding what color to paint these Brembos. They've been gold since I got them. That's the original color they were on an STI. And I rocked them for a while, but it's time for a change. So I picked up a few samples from a powder coating place, and I've kind of narrowed it down to a few. I don't think the neon kind of yellows are the right tone for the car. So I've narrowed it down to these two here. It's got two different colors. I'm not sure how well they're showing up on camera being different. This bottom one here is a little bit darker. This one's obviously a little bit brighter, and I'm really torn which one to go with. My gut tells me to go with the darker of the two. Unfortunately, the lighter of the two didn't get completely painted on the back, which is kind of unfortunate for sampling the colors, and I don't even know if they're showing completely accurately on screen, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. I'm leaning towards this darker one here. I think that with like a black logo would look really good and contrast against the blue, but let me know what you think in the comments down below. But let's get on to the main point of today's video. I'm gonna show you guys what I picked up from Vibrant Performance. So yeah, I might have went a little crazy with the Vibrant Performance stuff, but I'm absolutely stoked to get this on the car and clean up the engine bay. I've got all the fittings to run from the fuel pressure regulator down to the fuel rails with full AN fittings in between, new braided hose, and obviously had to get all the tools to do it right because I'm not gonna half-ass this one. I wanna make sure it looks right when I'm doing it the second time here. So the cutters, the vice grip locks for putting the fitting in, the hose cutting tool that I'm gonna need to cut off part of the lines coming off the fuel pressure regulator to put a fitting on there, and obviously some AN wrenches. So here's the current setup we have. I do have an alternator shroud that I pulled off just because it was rubbing on here, and I didn't want to risk that potentially splitting open before I was able to replace these lines. So that's one of the big issues as well, is that I never liked how I ran this over the top here from the front side of the fuel rails, and where it meets up, it sits right on top of the boost controller. So I think that looks really tacky, and I've never really liked these kind of like T-fittings with the clamp on it. It's just, it doesn't look like quality that I want on this build. So we're gonna be replacing that. And then this was the other thing that really bothered me, was how I have the line hooked up to the fuel pressure regulator. Again, just that clamp style. You can see that where the fray in the nylon is, and it just doesn't look very good. So we're gonna replace all of this. My plan is to run the rear parts of the lines back where they are currently and sitting under the top mount intercooler, and then kind of do the same for the front ones. So rather than running them across the top here, we're gonna run them around that way, back that way. They'll both meet up there, and then the two lines will run up to the fuel pressure regulator there. And like I said, full AN fittings. Well, there's a fair amount of stuff to take out of the engine bay before we can even start looking at assembling those new lines. So I'm gonna start taking that stuff apart, get the top mount intercooler out, and then start working on getting that intake manifold out as well. So I'm gonna throw you guys on a tripod and get started. Alright, so I am here to tell you, always do stuff right the first time. I tried to take a shortcut, and the car gods made me pay dearly. I tried to disconnect one of the coolant lines that I needed to move out of the way and just keep it upright so it didn't spill any coolant out, and it made a huge mess. So now I have coolant that I need to clean up. I had to run up to O'Reilly's and get some of the hose clamps that actually like cinch it shut when you've got one end disconnected so stuff doesn't spill out. But let me give you guys a quick update of what's in the engine bay. So as you can see, I've got the hoses clamped off here. This is what I was talking about. Always use these if you're gonna disconnect a hose. Save yourself the heartache. So we've got Most of the intake manifold disconnected at the bottom where the TGV deletes connect to the block. There's one bolt back on this side here that I need to get, which is why I had to disconnect that coolant line. And then we should be getting close to pulling this out. I've already disconnected the breather hose. The coolant reservoir tank is moved out of the way. I'm sure there's something that I'm forgetting that I'll find when I go to take it out, but we are getting very close. You guys saw the intake manifold is out of the car. Unfortunately, we already have bad news. I ordered some of the wrong parts. Let me show you. All right, so these are the fittings that go actually in the fuel rail here. Now, these are the ones that came out. As you can see, the O-rings are absolutely smoked, so we definitely won't be reusing those. But the issue is, these are the ones that came out of the car. It's a -8 straight cut on this side and a -6 flare cut on the other side. Unfortunately, the ones that I ordered are the reverse. It's a flare cut on the -8 side and a straight cut on the -6. Obviously, I want to use the exact same ones that were in there, so I just reordered those. So in the meantime, I've been working on cleaning up the intake manifold, just getting all the dirt off the kind of hidden spots, because I hate putting dirty stuff back in when you've got the opportunity to clean it. But getting that all cleaned up, you can see the fittings are still in that side there. But let me tell you guys a little more of what my plan of attack is at this point. So unfortunately, I'm obviously going to have to wait for those parts to come in before I can complete the job, but I still want to do as much as I can today so that when those parts do come in, I only have a few hours left of work to get this done. Fingers crossed when I say a few hours. So what I'm going to work on is getting hoses cut somewhat to length and getting one fitting on each end with excess of the hose so that I can kind of cut that to length once I get stuff more in the car and have a better idea of exactly how long I want it to be. And I'm going to work on getting the fittings on the fuel pressure regulator, cutting that metal pipe and putting the fitting on there. I'll show you guys more what I'm talking about there, but just going to try to do what I can before we wrap up today. Okay, so what I'm thinking here, and I put these on here just to show you guys which direction the hoses are going, so rather than running up and around like it was before and causing that kind of weird line over the top, I'm going to run a 180 fitting off the front side of both of these, and then it's going to run back around here, meet up with this one, and then they'll both run cleanly back there. So we've got a 180 here, a 90 here, and what I'm thinking is get the hoses attached here since I can loosely mock up and get a rough length, and then I'll wait to cut the lengths where they meet the T to go back to and from the fuel pressure regulator. So I'm going to go ahead and get these fittings attached on all four corners, and then have that ready so that when the parts do come, I can get that cut to length and be one step closer. So I've got all four of the lines running off the fuel rails cut somewhat to length. So I just put these loosely in here since they're the old ones. Like I said, I ordered new ones to replace those, but these are all cut. You can see this will run down the side of the fuel rail there, meet up back here, and then we've got these T fittings that's going to go in the middle there and route to and from the fuel pressure regulator. So these ones are good to go. I'm going to go ahead and start working on getting this fitting here, which is going to allow us to adapt to the metal. I think it's a 5/16 tube that comes off the fuel pressure regulator, and have AN fittings come off there and avoid that kind of messy look that we had before. All right, boys, we're back with the Legacy to finish up these fuel lines. Unfortunately, I was working on it on Sunday. It is now Friday. Between getting parts and work and other stuff I had going on, it's been longer than I would have liked, and now I'm a little bit nervous because it was one of those situations where I left bolts and that type of stuff, and I was like, oh, I'll remember where they go. Let's hope I remember where they go. But let me give you guys a quick update of where we're at. All right, so I picked up new gaskets that go in between the intake manifold and the TGV deletes. I did decide I'm going to pull this apart because it's going to be easier to get these in and out to test fitting length on these lines. So we're going to separate that, and when I did that, I didn't want to reuse those just in case they've gone bad. Don't want to deal with the problem after I put this back in. And we did get the proper size -8 to -6 AN fitting that goes into the fuel rail here. So I'm gonna throw these on first. Once those are on, then we'll go ahead and get this separated, and we can start looking at length of these lines and getting the fittings on the other side. TGV is separated from the intake manifold. I pulled out those old gaskets that I showed you guys earlier so that I can put the new ones in. But in the meantime, I'm gonna get the hoses loosely fitted to the new AN adapter here and set these in the car so I can start getting an idea of what length the hoses need to go on the front side and the back side here, and get the AN fittings on the other ends here, because as you remember before, I just cut them and did one side and left excess length on there. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw those on there and get them fitted in the car to get a rough estimate on the length. Got the TGV deletes in down here with the fuel lines loosely hooked up. They're not tightened down like you would if you were putting them in permanently, but this is just to get an idea of the length so that I can kind of start fitting them up back here. So as you can see, they're very close, but we're gonna need to do a little bit of trimming because with the AN setup that we're doing back there, you can get an idea of, you know, how much longer that is. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and just mark where I want these to sit so that we can cut them, and then I'll pull it back out of the car, cut them, put the fittings on, and then reinstall. Boys, got all the hoses out of the car. You can see where I've marked them with a gold Sharpie that we're gonna cut them there and then install, where'd they go? These fittings here. So each one that meets up in the back is gonna have one of those straight fittings off of it to go onto the T. So I need to get those 4 cut, install these fittings, and then we'll start looking at getting those back in the car so that we can get the return and feed lines that go off the T there hooked up to the fuel pressure regulator. And boys, check out these lines. So we'll have nice AN fittings here, so much better than those T-style fittings that were on there. And then this is all black braided hose versus the one that had the pattern on it that was in before. It's gonna look super clean. I'm really stoked on how this turned out. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those lines hooked back up to the fuel rails, start putting that stuff back in the car, make sure everything looks good, figuring out final routing, and trying to tighten everything down so we can start working towards getting those return and feed lines hooked up. We're getting there. Got the lines loosely mocked up there. Really looks nice. I'm super happy with how that's coming out. Got some new gaskets from Grimspeed. If you guys need gaskets for your Subaru, Grimspeed hands down makes the best gaskets. I've used it on all my exhaust parts, and then recently picked these up when I knew I had to replace the gaskets on this. All right, well, we are back for day 3 of this install. I ran out of time last night. It was like 11 o'clock, and I was like, I'm gonna go inside because I'm not gonna finish it until like 2 a.m. So we're gonna finish it up this morning. Let me give you guys a quick update of where we're at. So we made some great progress last night. All of the fuel lines are back in the car. They meet up back here with some really nice T's. Let me see if I can get some better lighting here. There we go. So they meet up at those T's there. I've got line separators about 1 inch off each connection there to keep those separated, but they sit nicely on top of each other and look super symmetrical, which I am stoked on. So we've got those guys there. And then I got the 150-degree fittings hooked up to the fuel pressure regulator over here. That gave me a little bit of trouble last night doing the last one down here, but it's on. Let's hope it doesn't leak. So the last thing to do is get the lines fitted that run from here to those T's. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull these fittings off of here, get those all fitted. I won't show you guys doing that because you guys have seen me do enough of it, but I will show you what they look like when they're done. I'm gonna do, let's see here, probably this end first so I can get those connected and then have a better idea of where the length needs to be on this side. So the fuel lines are in. All the AN lines are tightened and in place, and fortunately I was able to do it in the car so I could get the exact angle that I wanted, and that made it so much easier. So the next thing we need to do is tighten down the TGV deletes to the actual block. So I'm gonna go ahead and torque those down. I think it's like 18.4 foot-pounds of torque. Torque those down, and then we can start throwing the intake manifold back on and get to a point where I can test and make sure there's no leaks. All right, got the new gaskets in the intake manifold, so time to throw this bad boy back in the car. Boys, we're almost there. I've got everything but the intercooler back installed, so I'm gonna crank the car over to get the fuel pump to activate, try to look for any leaks, and fingers crossed we don't have any leaks, because then we can throw the intercooler back on and this job is done. We did it, boys! Doesn't look like there's any leaks on the car, which is a huge success. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw the top mount back on, pull the car out to let it run, and just make sure we're good to go. But I think we did it. I'm pretty hyped. I'll show you guys what it looks like here in a sec once I get the intercooler and the alternator shroud back on, so we can get a final engine bay update look.